Hello, I'm David Matthews and I'm an Emeritus Professor of Diabetes here in Oxford. Today I wanted to share with you some thoughts about managing crises. And these thoughts spring directly out of my medical training and background. I'll put a stethoscope around my neck briefly, which is the iconic picture of a doctor. But I'll take it off again now, but I'll come back to it later because it has a relevance. Now, much of medical training is about crisis management, simply because most of medicine is about trying to fix things that have gone wrong. And this is especially true of acute medicine and, of course, accident and emergency department. I've spent many hours on take at the old Radcliffe Infirmary and at the Central Middlesex Hospital where I was registrar, and later as a consultant I've conducted post-take ward rounds at the John Radcliffe Hospital here in Oxford. But much of my time has been spent in teaching others, medical students and graduates, about the established and long-tested medical approach to the two broad areas medical crisis management, namely diagnosis and treatment. Now, the reason that I'm talking about crises generally is that the systematic approach and the lessons of medicine can probably be applied to all crises, namely what is the diagnosis and what is the treatment. Let's just think about crises generally. Let's take water damage to property as a simple example. This might be slight and ongoing, like what is that damp patch on the wall? This picture comes from one of our bedrooms. It's a problem of damp that does need sorting sometime. On the other hand, your crisis might be existential. That means there's something that's really threatening your life, livelihood, or even existence. Now, what you do then depends on the range of the seriousness in which your problem lies. But let's start with a routine crisis in medicine. Someone has a medical problem or a complaint. What does the doctor do? Well, the process is very formalised and has been practised for well over a century. William Osler, his book is here, died as the Regius Professor of Medicine 101 years ago. And it's all here in his writings, and it's what I spent my time teaching medical students in Oxford. What one needs to do is to take a history. That means you talk to the patient carefully and write down the responses. Try to be systematic. What troubles you now? When did it start? Is the problem localised anywhere? Where? And so on. And then a larger systematic questioning covering specific systems. That is respiratory, gut, nervous system, and so on. You then undertake an examination. You use your eyes and your nose and your sense of touch. And this is where you use a stethoscope. Because with a stethoscope you can do a quick examination of the heart and the lungs and indeed sometimes the gut. So then you organise some relevant investigations and then you produce what's called a differential diagnosis. That's a list of possibilities. Especially when you're not sure, you want to say this is the range of things that might be going on. And then of course you come on to treat. And all of this approach is summarised here in this book, which was written by my mentor here in Oxford for many years, Robert Turner. And this book, all of this, is just about history and examination. Now, a lot of organisations are pretty good about taking a history and examination. They then do some relevant investigations and produce a differential diagnosis and then treat. So that's what you have to, in summary, do. You say, take a history, do an examination, relevant investigations, produce a differential and treat. That's fairly straightforward and good way of going about crises. But let's have another look at this damp patch and see how this works. So first of all, we take a history. So we talk to each other at home and say, well, how did this happen? When did it happen? It seemed to have happened gradually. We do an examination. We run up to the loft and we look at the guttering above the corner of the room. And then we do some investigations. We check the integrity of the drain and the outflow, and then we come to a diagnosis. So the outflow was blocked by the wisteria growing too high. So what is the treatment? The treatment is to prune the wisteria, clear the blockage, and replace this hopper at the top. Well, what about existential crises? These are the life and death emergencies, and the medical management of these is very different because such crises are critically time dependent. It's not just that we abandoned all of our system of doing this logically, it's just that the steps are taken in a different order and, crucially, at a different pace. Let's take an example in medicine. So someone comes in critically short of breath, and they look like this. Well, what is that? Is it asthma or heart failure or pneumonia or a pneumothorax or COVID? No, it's none of those. With your tongue hanging out like that, that's indicative of what's called diabetic pre-coma. It's ketoacidosis. It's an acidotic breathing. It's very different from asthma. If you've got asthma, you purse your lips together. And if you've got heart failure, then you get shortness of breath when you're lying down. So at this point, we just need to think about what we're going to do, because the patient is going to die very quickly and in the next few hours. So forget the history and investigations. We've seen the patient. They need an immediate saline drip and some insulin in the very near future. Now, later on, of course, we'll take a history and get some blood tests done and sort out a long-term treatment plan and make a further inquiry as to why this particular thing happened and why we should have got to crisis point. But all of that can wait. In other cases of shortness of breath, we may not know initially what this is. It might be pneumonia or COVID or heart failure, and this would be our differential. And while we sort out which one of those it is, we are going to be treating all of the possible causes. So let's get back to the house again. We don't care with this house, which is about to fall into the sea, about the history and the cause. We don't go and investigate the high tides or anything like that. We don't look at the seashore and the nature of the sand. We're not going to do any investigations until we get the people out of that house. So you get on with the immediate treatment of what it is that you need to do. And so here's the bottom line of all of this. You do the following normally. You do history, examination, investigation, differential diagnosis and treatment. But you decide whether you're facing an existential crisis. And that means you have to decide, is this an emergency? If it is, then time is of the essence. You cannot afford to wait until every stage is done to the textbook standard. Don't write a 100-page history or analysis if you've got an existential crisis. You can get on and do that later. So you must establish a provisional differential diagnosis fast. The crisis is called by A or B or C, and indeed perhaps by A and B and C. Then you establish a crisis timetable. This is really important. A timeline. You need to be aggressive about this. Most existential crises need something in place by the end of the week, and some by the end of the day, and in the cases that I've been talking to you, they need to happen within the hour. If someone tells you that you've got time, you don't have it. Don't let anyone tell you this can be sorted out over long time periods. It can't. If you have an existential crisis and think you've got time to get everything done, you simply do not. Treat A and B and C immediately, all three. There may be more. You can treat 3 or 4 things in medicine. One often has treated people who are acutely short of breath for both pneumonia and heart failure while we sort out with x-rays and other things what it actually is. There's plenty of time later to go back and refine the diagnosis, and at that stage you can then focus the treatment more carefully. Finally, whatever crisis it is you face, you'll almost certainly need a team to solve it. And build that team ahead of the time that you need it. You build it on trust and friendship and morale. Get the team to pull together and delegate. 5 members of the team? Well, divide the task into 5. If it's acute, you need to be getting on with a whole lot of stuff simultaneously. So, existential crises are real. They occur a lot in medicine, and people die in hospital when there are delays. Your existential crisis may not be anything to do with medicine and may not involve death of an individual, but it might involve death of something you cherish, the demise of something that you really worry about, and you need to think about this. Whatever you do, don't dodge the issue.